With the E-type BOW spreading across the Baker residence during the events of Resident Evil 7, new forms would arise based on the hominid structuring that would look like an absolute nightmare. Due to the BOW's ability to interact with human cells to affect the mitotic pathways within those cells, this would allow the mold to interact presumably with every different variant of cell that a human form has and manipulate them into a sort of physical presence that it saw fit. One of these creatures in particular is referred to as the molded. These beings appear to be a regular human who may have been infected by the mold, but then what makes them so different from, say, the rest of the Baker family? Why does the family maintain their humanity, at least to some degree, while others seemingly become monsters? We will discuss that in this episode. So first thing we need to cover for all those who may not have seen my quick rundown video over what Resident Evil 7 is, at least concerning the disease, I will link that video at the end of this video so you can kind of get a better idea. But for all those who are like myself who never really follow links anyways because I'm mindlessly just surfing on the internet or playing World of Warcraft with YouTube on the background, the mold is essentially an alteration to a fungus that makes it much more infectious. Originally, it was designed to be used on individuals who would like to perhaps end a conflict. Specifically, the E-types, which were usually 10-year-old females, would be sent in with a control over this mold. They would infect people after infiltrating a regime and from there would turn enemies into allies. The whole idea was predicated on it's better to make people think like you do than hold them indefinitely, as that would be cheaper if they decided just to kind of go along with your specific ideas. Well, the issue is that these E-types were very much sentient, and as such, they had their own thoughts and opinions on what they would like to do and how they would like their life to continue. With Evelyn, she originally broke containment on the ship she was being transported on. With Mia as her caretaker of sorts, Evelyn saw her as something of a mother. And when this completely fell through and the ship crashed, Evelyn moved on to a family that just happened to be nearby. This family found the girl and took her in, and quickly they succumbed to the mold as it began infesting every facet of their thinking. Starting with headaches and tinnitus, which I currently have, and God, it's awful, she took over the family and would basically be ruler of the roost. Based upon what you are told in a dreamlike trance state from Jack, mentally, the family is still there, but they aren't able to overcome her influence as long as she is living. The entire incident is summed up when you inject Evelyn with the mold, destroying concoction that causes her to calcify and become completely destroyed. However, there are several years that take place in between that ship crashing and the arrival of Ethan to break Mia out of the Dolby house. During this time frame, others would arrive more out of curiosity or fact-finding reasons than to actually find and break people out. One group of reporters were investigating all the missing people, which would ultimately lead to their end as well. Others would still show up, perhaps looking for other lost family members, and would befall the same fate as their kin. Ultimately, this would actually lead to a pretty sizable amount of people that began piling up at the Dolby residence, which again would also have an effect on bringing in more cops, looking for those people who would continue to add to that number, which would bring in more reporters, and then their family, and so on and so forth. So again, a lot of biomass sitting in just one area, but the question is, what to do with it? Well, the mold knows. The mold, as mentioned previously, heavily infests the cells of the human body. These filaments that likely spread all throughout your meat suit will act as scaffolding on a cell-by-cell basis, despite your muscle and bone providing the shape. The effect this has had is, considering that it has such close interactions with the cells, it is actually piercing the cellular membranes. So for instance, when these filaments get into a cell, right, it is actually known that if you inject certain components, such as cytoplasm of a cell that is currently undergoing mitosis, into a cell that is not, this can actually trigger a cell to begin mitosis despite it not needing to. So with these filaments through the membrane, this would say to me that there is an activation of the mitotic pathways, which is a chemical that the fungus produces itself. It must be complementary to the receptors on the interior of the cell triggering this mitosis, which suggests that the cell may also be able to interact with other cellular mechanisms within the body and can influence how a cell acts entirely, and this will be important in a little bit. We can see the example laid out when Jack actually takes a shovel to Ethan's leg and good lord, breaking through that bone, ouchies. We also see it when Mia goes ham on Ethan and chops off his hand with a chainsaw. All these pieces of the body are able to be reconnected by the mold. The mold, upon coming in contact with a severed limb, will link back up with the filaments of the body on the other side and inspire cellular mitosis to bridge the gap, making the severed limb functional once more. The implications of this for the medical field would be amazing, at least in this universe, but the issue is the continued march of mental degradation and control of that fungus and how it controls you, ordered by Evelyn. So you are basically caught up with a few points I made in the main video I originally posted. It'll be at the end if a more in-depth conversation about the mold interests you. Alright, so carrying on, with the mold having the abilities it does and running off the general idea that it can not only affect cells, but also may have access to the genetic coding and could presumably switch on and off genes with chemicals released by the fungus itself, this is how we actually get to the molded we see stalking the basement at the Dolby residence. Well, remember all that biomass that I mentioned was piling up? That's exactly what the molded is. However, it's not just like a reanimated person like anyone infected with the T-virus. Instead, these people have been broken down on a cell-by-cell basis and restored. We actually see at the beginning of this process when the officer who tried to help Ethan out, well, sort of tried to help Ethan out. Originally, he sort of lost his head and was then infected with the mold post-mortem by Jack. However, later on, Lucas would completely cut this infection area off, which halted the process from continuing. But before getting to this process, you know I gotta do it to him. Starting with the feet, we see that this creature still retains its plantigrade structuring that is pretty much completely normal with all humans. Remnants of all 5 toes remain, but much like the mold on the walls, the feet are completely covered with what appears to be necrotic tissue. But in reality, it's only the mold. On the back of the legs, we see that stringy material like tubes run, which can be assumed to be the calf muscles, albeit its morphology and structuring are severely compromised. Nevertheless though, it does still work and support the leg. Moving further up the thigh region, we can see more muscle mixed in with the mold and has been flayed out, giving it a bulkier appearance. There's really no discernible pelvic bone in this area. Instead, the muscle from the thigh continues to run up to the abdomen area on the same plane, giving the abdomen about the same width of its stance. Inside of the abdomen, you may be interested to know that there are actually organs. There are also organs presumably in the chest as well, but they are not so much like ours. They appear to be only organs in the academic sense and are extremely vulnerable to damage, maybe even more so than ours. Our organs rely on a system of pressures which gives them rigidity and structure even should damage occur. However, with the molded, there is no internal pressure as everything is exposed. And because of this, minor damage can cause the creature to spew out a gunky mess everywhere as the organs are liquefied on contact with physical force due to integrity issues. Further up the chest, we see that perhaps lung tissue is underneath the interwoven mold and it almost appears to be like ribs. This would be expected as the human body would naturally protect this area quite heavily. The shoulders are actually disproportionately small to the neck area and the arms that hang down off of them. Moving down to the arms, we can see that they are extremely long. The molded has a ranged attack where they can extend these arms to reach further away to get to the non-molded. This would imply that the material within the arms is actually bunched up and returns to this standard position after the creature essentially throws its arms at the non-infected. This would require a lot more connective tissue than what we have that perhaps could, in theory, be damaged each time it uses its arms, but due to its regeneration, this would heal. The hands are the main attraction. Each finger has essentially been replaced by long blade-like nails, which might even just still be bone, and should you not already be infected with the mold already and have the regeneration factor, this could easily end a normal person in just one swipe. These would undoubtedly lob off limbs and pierce the human body, leading to internal hemorrhaging and massive blood loss externally as well. Moving up to the neck, we see that this is a thick-ass boy! The neck is, strangely enough, roughly 2 to 2.5 times the thickness of a normal neck. This would be for structuring purposes, as losing a head would be kind of, detrimental, but then moving up to the face, we see the stuff of nightmares. The face has a gaping maw with teeth several inches in length. In the back, we see the remnants of the molars, showing that the human background and heritage is still somewhat there. Further into the mouth, if you look, in some spots, it's also possible to spot a human eye left over from the process. At the top of the head sits sunken in eye sockets, however, there does not appear to be any eyes that are useful within these sockets. Getting a good look at this creature, we can see that it undoubtedly was human. However, the process, like I said, is not just being infected and slowly changed while living. If that were the case, you would become something mutated like the Baker family as opposed to the molded. The molded specifically rely on the usage of biomass to make up their forms. After a person is captured and ended, they would be brought down to the basement for processing. Here is where we get a lot of the creatures and why we find so many clustered. When the meat suit is offline, the mold would still be injected into the body and allowed to work its way through. However, during this process, cells would begin to necrotize. The skin, for instance, would not be really all that salvageable, nor would most of the brain, and some of the muscle would also be lost in the process. That said, there would still be a lot to use for the mold. With the filament spreading, it would come across still living cells within your body, because even if you keel over, your body would still be very much so alive. These would be the cells that remain functional within the new molded body. Things like intestines might still be operational to a degree, bones, deeper muscle, all these would have a purpose. The bones are of great interest because of something called osteoblasts. With the mold piercing cellular membranes and breaking down a person to their most basic components, it would happen upon these specific cells. They are responsible for bone growth. When you break a bone or want to regulate uptake of calcium into your bone, your body actually sends out chemical messengers to begin this process. Osteoblasts move out over the bone and build a bridging for the gap formed by the break, or pull surrounding calcium out of the fluid directly near them and place it into the bone matrix. This is why our bones get stronger through things like exercise, because our bodies detect little microfractures and continue to build them stronger. With the molded, however, they need more than just stronger bones. New bones, such as fingers, are built to be sharp and several extra inches in length. The teeth would also be another area. The external material to build these would also involve the breakdown of bone in other places, such as the arm connecting the humerus to the radius and ulna bones, so that the arm could actually stretch. So it's presumed basically that the elbows are, like I said, just connective tissue. So what's used to break this down? Well, that's the osteoclasts, which are responsible for basically pulling calcium out of the bone and degrading bone matrix. And this is usually how you balance calcium in the blood, giving you what you need. So pulling the calcium out of that area of the arm would be moved down to the hands to create the claws. Judging by the height of the head on the molded and the eyes, where we see them left over the mouth, it can also be assumed that the skull has been extensively broken down here as well. Pieces would now become the new teeth of this creature. But it's also possible, however, that the brain does still exist in some capacity within the molded. The filaments may have been able to save some of the neurotissue, considering that it has the ability to force cells to undergo mitosis, neurons being included in this. And this may have given this creature an actual intelligence. The big separating factor between the mold walking around and the mold on the wall would have to be based on human intellect that existed before. It would seem that the higher functions that stem from primate brains, however, have been lost, which involves many areas of the cerebrum, such as speech and writing, but this may actually be due to anatomical mutations as well. However, the thing about the molded is that they can sense and track or hunt down non-infected beings. This would be a more baser instinct of the brain, which is usually referred to as the lizard brain. So I just want to go ahead and get out in front of this now. Yes, these are actual real terms. It's basically the most interior portion of your brain, like the pons, brainstem, and limbic system, and that is referred to as the lizard brain, as they are considered to be the oldest portions of the brain where a lot of instincts and drive for survival come from. Then as evolution continued and the brain continued to build outward, this is what created the mammal brain. And with humans specifically, it built out even further past this, which is known as the primate brain, which is why we have such big cerebrums. I've said this before, and I think I had like a 12-year-old trying to argue with me in the comments about biology and why I knew nothing because I said this. It is just like, what? It's actually a pretty fairly interesting concept, so I would highly recommend looking into it. All right, so enough with assault. Because of more than likely the salvaging of the most basic components of the brain, the molded have been known to have a degree of craftiness and resourcefulness and will set traps for anyone who sneaks by. Because of the breakdown of the bone in the body, as mentioned before, they're also able to cram themselves into areas and lay in wait. They can also reassemble into walls of mold to hide, and then when they sense someone is nearby, can exit for a sneak attack. This camouflage and deliberate intent to hide would suggest that they are more than just a hunk of mold hanging on a human skeletal frame. However, planning and thinking things out does seemingly elude them. Object permanence is something the primate brain is known for, and when a molded loses track of you beyond a door, it will swing wildly at this door or break the pursuit entirely as you no longer exist in its mind or what's left of it. A thing to know about the molded, though, is their extreme regeneration abilities. When you damage the organs of the molded, you aren't really injuring them at all or really that much, because these organs are not like how you and I see ours. The same could be said for the rest of the body. Damaging a molded and running off will give it time to repair through mitosis because of the fungus. So it's best to press the attack because this regeneration can be overcome should you cause enough damage in a very short period of time. Within the cast of the molded also, there exists other morphological differences that would have to be assumed based on time infected. Some of these have been seen to be more pronounced bone growth in the body, specifically in the hands, that can act as a shield or a larger natural offensive bony protrusion. And even with others, as seen with the white molded known as fumers, their morphology and regeneration is quite pronounced, and as such, I think they kind of need their own video discussing why they differ so greatly from those that are currently kept in the basement. But for now, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about my breakdown of the mold in the comments. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and second channel links in the description if anybody's interested in that. And also, I'm streaming like a lot more nowadays. No, I don't plan on becoming a streaming channel like exclusively or anything, but it's fun, so videos like this will still be made. But right now, I'm actually working on Alien Isolation on live stream, which means the videos for that aren't too far off either. So if you like to go and watch any of my other live streams and stuff like that, it is on this channel. It's under a playlist called All Live Streams. I know it's super original, but apart from that, I would like to thank some of my patrons real quick. Huge shout out to It's Not a Spoon, our lone astronaut. Next up, I want to thank our scientists, Freedom Units 44, Skilt, and Trey Windenall. And I would also like to thank the rest of my patrons. You guys are awesome. All right, I hope you guys have a good weekend, and I will see y'all in the next one.